Sergeant Alicia Ace Morgan sat on the edge of her cot, her boots already laced and her duffel bag packed tight. The small tent around her was quiet, except for the soft humming of the heater and the occasional distant sounds of radio chatter. Outside, the cold wind blew across the Afghan mountains, reminding everyone that winter was here. But in Alicia's heart, it was already Christmas. She had been counting down the days. Her 6-month deployment was over, and she had survived. No injuries, no mistakes, just long days, dangerous missions, and sharp aim. Everyone on base knew Alicia, not because she talked much, but because her presence meant precision. She was calm under pressure, deadly behind the scope, and always one step ahead of the enemy. But today, she wasn't thinking about war. She was thinking about her mother's homemade cookies, her father's terrible holiday jokes, and her little sister's warm hugs. She missed the sound of her family laughing, the smell of pine from the Christmas tree, and the feeling of falling asleep in her own bed. Most of all, she missed being just Alicia. Not Sergeant Morgan, not the sniper, not the soldier, just herself. Her leave had been approved weeks ago. Her replacement was already on base, and the final paperwork was done. All she had to do was catch her flight from the nearby airstrip, and she'd be on her way home. Even her commanding officer had shaken her hand that morning and said, "You earned it. Ace, go enjoy Christmas." As she stood up and grabbed her gear, her squad mates gathered to say goodbye. Some gave her high fives, others clapped her on the back. Private Jones handed her a small wrapped box and said, "Don't open until Christmas." She smiled, thanked him, and tucked it into her bag. There was a feeling of happiness in the air, not just for Alicia, but for everyone. Seeing one of their own make it out safely was a small victory. In war, victories weren't always about territory or missions. Sometimes, it was just knowing that someone got to go home. The base jeep was already waiting near the gate. The driver waved, and Alicia tossed her bag in the back. She looked around one last time, her eyes scanning the mountains and the sky. It was still dangerous here, always was, but for once, she was leaving it behind. As the jeep started moving, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. 6 months of tension, stress, and focus slowly began to fade. She leaned back, closed her eyes, and pictured the Christmas lights hanging on her porch back home. Just a few more hours and she'd be there. But then, the radio crackled. The driver picked it up, listened for a second, then looked at her with a strange expression. "Incoming report," he said quietly. "Elite unit pinned down in the Corval Valley. They're requesting immediate sniper support." Alicia's eyes opened slowly. Corval Valley. She knew that place too well. She had done 3 missions there, and the terrain was brutal. Sharp cliffs, narrow passes, and too many places for the enemy to hide. Her team wasn't there now, but the trapped unit was part of an elite squad. Good men, strong fighters. The driver didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. The message was clear, and the choice was hers. Alicia looked at her bag, then back at the direction they had come from. The base was still close enough to return, but time was running out for the trapped soldiers. She took a deep breath, feeling her heartbeat slow, steady like it always did before a mission. Her hand reached for her rifle without thinking. Christmas could wait. Her duty could not. She tapped the driver on the shoulder and said quietly, "Turn around." The jeep skidded slightly as it turned, tires crunching against the gravel under the sudden change of direction. Sergeant Alicia Morgan didn't say much. She just stared out at the fading hills, her fingers drumming lightly against her rifle. The air felt colder now, sharper, as if it too understood what was coming. Back at the forward operations base, alarms were no longer silent. Radio towers blinked with urgency, voices overlapped, and boots hit the ground in rapid steps. Soldiers were gearing up, commanders shouting across the comms. Something had gone wrong, very wrong, and Alicia had walked right back into it. A Special Forces team, Shadow Unit 6, had been deployed on a high-risk recon mission near Corval Valley. They were ambushed just before dawn, pinned down near a rocky outcrop, surrounded from 2 sides. They couldn't move without exposing themselves to heavy fire. And worst of all, they had no sniper coverage. The valley was infamous among the troops. Locals called it the Bone Path, a stretch of hostile terrain where too many missions had turned into recovery efforts. The enemy knew the land better than any satellite map ever could. Every rock, every trail, every shadow was a trap waiting to be triggered. Command had only one option left: send someone who knew how to turn the valley's silence into a weapon, someone who had hunted there before and walked away alive. And that someone had just stepped off the jeep, again in uniform, again ready. As Alicia entered the command tent, all eyes turned to her. The energy in the room shifted, like the atmosphere right before a thunderstorm. She didn't ask questions, she didn't need to. A digital map flickered on the screen, marking the last known coordinates of the pinned team. "Sniper nest here," said the operations officer, pointing to a ridge above the conflict zone. "You used this spot 4 months ago." "I remember," Alicia replied, her voice flat but steady. She leaned in, analyzing the movement patterns, the enemy positions, the timestamps. The math of survival was clicking in her mind: range, angle, wind, elevation, timing. "No air support for at least 30 minutes, the officer added, "and no backup sniper in range." Alicia gave a slight nod. "I'll go solo," she said. No one argued. Within minutes, she was back in full gear, the familiar weight of her rifle on her shoulder like an old promise. She checked her scope, loaded the chamber, and strapped extra rounds to her vest. Beside her, the helicopter blades began to spin, slicing through the cold air like a countdown. She stepped aboard with calm precision, like this was just another day at the office. The flight toward the valley was tense and quiet. No music, no chatter, just the roar of the rotors and the occasional update from the radio. Alicia sat near the open side door, eyes locked on the ground below. She could already see the curve of the valley, that dangerous stretch of land that had tested her before. As they approached the drop point, the pilot yelled over the noise, "You sure about this?" Alicia simply replied, "I'm not going to leave them there." She didn't wait for a reply. With a practiced motion, she jumped, landing hard on a ledge just beneath the ridge. Snow dust puffed around her boots as she rolled into cover, heart steady, hands firm. The world narrowed into her sniper instincts. Read the terrain, stay low, stay invisible, protect the team. Below, the firefight had intensified. Muzzle flashes sparked like fireflies in the dark. Through her scope, Alicia saw movement. 3 soldiers trapped behind broken rock, pressed low, low on ammo, out of options. And then she saw the enemies closing in. She exhaled slowly, lined up the first shot, and whispered to herself, "You're not alone anymore." The bullet sliced the air like a whisper. One down, then another, then silence for half a second, and then panic, but not from her side. The enemy had realized something had changed. The ghost had returned. Alicia didn't stop to celebrate. She just adjusted her scope and prepared for the next shot. The rescue had begun, and she was the one holding the line between life and death. Christmas was far away now, but that didn't matter. She was exactly where she needed to be. The base gate stood quiet now, its metal frame cold and still under the pale morning sky. Just minutes ago, Alicia Morgan had been heading toward it with thoughts of home. Now, she stood beside it, helmet in hand, heart in conflict, eyes locked on the horizon. Behind her, the wind whispered against the buildings, tugging at the edges of her jacket like a ghost trying to hold her back. In front of her, a decision waited, sharp, heavy, and real. No one forced her to make it. No one could. She had already earned her way out. Every mission she completed, every life she protected, every day she stayed alive in enemy territory, all of it gave her the right to leave. No guilt hung over her head, no unfinished duty. But somewhere deep inside, a fire hadn't gone out yet. The news of Shadow Unit 6 being trapped had hit harder than she expected. It wasn't just another team. She knew one of them, Lieutenant Brandon Reeve. They had trained together, laughed over bad coffee in the middle of war zones, and once patched each other up after a mission gone wrong. He had written her a letter 2 months ago, telling her to make it home safe. Now he was the one in danger. Alicia stared at her duffel bag on the ground. It looked out of place now. Too clean, too civilian. It was packed for snow-covered porches and quiet mornings, not ambushes and rescues. From across the yard, the base commander approached. Colonel Anders was a solid man, the kind who didn't smile often. He stopped a few feet from her, his breath fogging in the cold. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "You've done enough." Alicia didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked up at the flag fluttering above the base, then down at her hands, steady, ready. Finally, she replied, "I know." Then she reached down, unzipped the duffel, and pulled out her sniper gear, piece by piece. Anders didn't stop her. He just nodded once, slowly, like a soldier who had seen this kind of bravery before, the quiet kind, the kind that didn't need medals to matter. As Alicia reassembled her kit, one of the younger soldiers ran up, eyes wide, holding a headset. "We've got live feed from a recon drone, ma'am," he said. "They're still pinned down." She slipped on her gloves, adjusted the strap of her rifle, and followed the soldier into the command tent. The drone footage played in grainy black and white. 3 soldiers crouched behind broken stones, surrounded by open terrain and enemy movement. The ridge above them was the only possible overwatch point, and she had used it once before to cover an extraction mission. "Can you get eyes on them from that ridge?" a tech asked. Alicia didn't blink. "Yes," she said, "and I can buy them time." She turned to the team, eyes focused and calm. "I want to be dropped at the south ledge," she added. "No patrol, no support, just me and the scope." Some of the room exchanged glances, but no one questioned her. They knew Alicia's record: clean shots, zero hesitation, and nerves of steel. When she said she could do it, she meant it. Back outside, as the chopper warmed up on the helipad, Alicia took one last look at the gate. This wasn't how she imagined spending Christmas. She had pictured lights and music, her sister's laughter, her mother's arms. But deep inside, she knew she belonged here, right now, with a purpose that mattered. She climbed into the chopper as the crew chief gave her a respectful nod. No cheers, no ceremony. Just silent respect for the sniper who chose duty over comfort, again. As the aircraft lifted off the ground, snow began to fall, soft, slow flakes drifting through the sky. Below, the gate remained behind. Ahead, a storm was waiting, and Alicia Morgan was flying straight into it. Because some stories don't wait for holidays. Some heroes don't get perfect timing. And some soldiers, the rarest kind, don't turn their backs, even when the gate is open. The helicopter cut through the sky like a blade. Its rotors roared above the mountains, sending echoes bouncing off the jagged cliffs below. Inside, Sergeant Alicia Morgan sat still, her eyes locked on the map taped to the wall across from her. Outside, the world was changing. The soft snow had turned into a gray mist hanging low over the valley. The pilot's voice crackled through her headset. "ETA 3 minutes, winds picking up." Alicia gave a small nod, though her heart was already in the valley. She had been here before, months ago, but it felt like a lifetime. Corval Valley was cursed in the minds of many soldiers. Narrow paths, high ridges, and shadows that seemed to move on their own. It was the kind of place where mistakes got buried under dust and silence. But Alicia didn't believe in curses. She believed in preparation and in precision. She checked her rifle one last time. Everything was ready, scope aligned, chamber loaded, every strap secured. Her fingers ran across the cold metal like a pianist memorizing a final song. This weapon wasn't just a tool, it was her voice in the fight. The helicopter dipped suddenly, slicing low through a narrow canyon. Below, the enemy position came into view, small dots moving between rocks and ruined buildings. They had the high ground, they had numbers, and they thought they had control. But they didn't know Alicia had come back. "We can't land, too hot," the pilot shouted. "You'll have to jump from the ridge." Alicia was already standing. She clipped the rope to her vest, nodded to the crew chief, and stepped to the edge of the open door. The wind slammed into her like a wall, cold and loud, but she didn't flinch. Without hesitation, she jumped. The fall wasn't long, but the landing was hard. Her boots hit the snow-dusted ridge, knees bent, shoulder rolled. She dropped low immediately, rifle to chest, body still. Around her, the valley stretched wide and unforgiving. No second chances here. Only targets and time. She crawled forward on her belly, using the rocks for cover. Her eyes scanned the terrain, her scope finding the trapped team. 3 soldiers pressed behind a fallen wall, under constant fire. From her position, she could see it all. The enemy snipers, the machine gun nest, the flanking movement to the west. Alicia exhaled, her breath fogging against the scope lens. Then she adjusted the wind dial, placed her cheek to the stock, and squeezed. One shot. The machine gun nest went silent. Another shot. The flanking fighter dropped before he could take 2 more steps. She worked like a machine, moving target to target, calculating wind, distance, angle. Her hands calm, her heart even, her mind clear. Each bullet was a message. Each silence that followed was proof it was received. Below, the pin team began to move. With the pressure lifting, they could reposition, reload, respond. Radio chatter picked up in her earpiece. Unknown sniper on Overwatch. Alicia smirked slightly, not needing to reply. The enemy was confused now. They couldn't see her, couldn't trace the shots. They were panicking, shouting in languages she didn't speak, but fear sounded the same in every tongue. Then, from the East Ridge, Alicia spotted something new, a rocket launcher. Two men setting it up behind a stone barrier, aiming directly toward the trapped soldiers. She had seconds, maybe less. Her finger tightened, breath held, heart paused. She fired. The first man fell back with the rocket slipping from his hands. The second tried to run, but never made it past the next rock. The launcher lay untouched, harmless, just metal now. Alicia blinked, breathed again, and shifted to her next position. She couldn't afford to stay in one place. Not in this valley. She moved along the ridge like a shadow, always low, always silent. And the enemy began to feel it. The presence they couldn't see but couldn't ignore. The battlefield had changed. Not because of numbers, but because of one sniper who had chosen to come back. As the light faded and dusk began to settle, the air turned colder. But Alicia stayed sharp. Because down below, her job wasn't finished yet. And until it was, she would remain in the valley of fire. The sky was turning dark. Soft streaks of red and orange slipped behind the mountains as dusk crept over Corval Valley. The shadows grew longer, and so did the danger. But Alicia Morgan stayed still, hidden in the rocks above, watching through the glass eye of her scope. Below her, the firefight had slowed, not because the enemy had stopped, but because they were confused. They couldn't find the ghost on the ridge. One moment their gunmen were shouting orders, the next, silence. They didn't know where the bullets came from, only that they came fast, sharp, and without mercy. Alicia lay flat on the frozen stone, her body pressed into the earth like she was part of it. Her rifle rested against a small rise in the rock, perfectly balanced. She blinked slowly, scanning, tracking, breathing in rhythm with the wind. This wasn't just shooting. This was chess at 600 meters, one move at a time. In the headset, she heard movement from the pin team. They were talking again, louder, more confident now. "Snipers got our 6, someone said, voice full of hope. "We push in 30, another replied. Alicia narrowed her eyes and shifted her position an inch to the left. There, movement behind a collapsed wall. She focused in, saw the glint of a scope. Enemy sniper, lying in wait. She exhaled slowly, let her heartbeat drop, then squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed across the valley, sharp and clean. Through the lens, she saw the target slump to the side. One more threat down, one less shadow waiting in the dark. Her hands moved smoothly, chambering the next round, adjusting for range. She didn't rush. Rushing was how you missed. Instead, she moved with purpose, calm and cold, like the snow beneath her. The radio clicked again. "They're trying to move behind the ridge," said a voice from drone control. Alicia tilted her scope, swept the area, and found them. 3 figures running low between boulders, trying to flank the team. She tagged the lead runner first, then the one in the back. The last froze mid-step, then dropped his weapon and sprinted. She let him go, not because she missed, but because fear could spread faster than bullets. The minutes dragged on, each one measured by the rhythm of her shots. The valley, once loud with gunfire, now echoed with moments of silence. Long, eerie pauses between chaos. Every time the enemy tried to push forward, Alicia answered with lead and glass. She was unseen, unreachable, untouchable. And slowly, the trapped soldiers began to rise. They moved from cover to cover, their formation tightening, their confidence returning. The sniper above had become their guardian angel, watching every angle, saving them one shot at a time. Then came the moment she'd been waiting for, the call. "Air support inbound," said the command operator. "ETA 5 minutes. 5 minutes. That's all she needed. She shifted again, rolling slightly to reach a new vantage point. Her shoulder ached from lying on the cold rock. Her eye burned from staring through the scope so long. But she didn't blink, didn't break. The final wave of attackers was forming. Maybe 10 of them, desperate now. They didn't care about tactics anymore, just survival. They charged from the far slope, yelling as they ran with weapons raised. Alicia counted quickly, lined up her shots, and began to fire. 1, 2, 3. Each shot found its mark. 4, 5. The line began to break. 6. A grenade rolled down the slope, landing not far from her nest. She ducked low, covering her head as it exploded with a burst of sound and snow. The rocks shook. Her scope cracked slightly, but she was still alive. She coughed once, wiped the dust from her lens, and went back to work. By the time the air support arrived, the valley looked different. The ambush had failed. The shadows had thinned. And Alicia Morgan, alone, frozen, focused, had changed the fate of the battlefield with nothing but patience, breath, and bullets. One shot at a time, she had turned the tide. Not with rage, but with resolve. Not for glory, but for those who counted on her. And as the helicopter thundered overhead, clearing the sky, Alicia let her rifle rest, just for a moment. She looked up at the darkening sky and whispered, "Still here." The sound of engines filled the sky. 2 gunships roared in from the west, their blades slicing through the dusk like thunder. Their arrival shook the valley, not just with noise, but with hope. And for the first time in hours, the pinned soldiers knew they might actually make it out alive. From her position high above, Alicia Morgan stayed low. She watched the aircraft sweep over the enemy lines, raining down controlled fire like hammer strikes. The mountains lit up in flashes of orange and smoke. Chaos broke the enemy's rhythm, scattering fighters who had once moved with deadly coordination. They were running now, retreating into the rocks, falling back toward the narrow trails they had come from. The ambush had collapsed. What had started as a trap for an elite unit was now turning into a rescue operation. Alicia exhaled slowly and adjusted her aim. Her cracked scope still held together, just enough for her to make every bullet count. She picked off the remaining threats near the southern wall, covering the team's movement as they began to regroup. They were no longer hiding. They were advancing. "Shadow Unit 6 is mobile," came a voice through her headset. Alicia nodded to no one, her fingers tightening around the rifle. She stayed on overwatch, eyes scanning the ridgelines. She knew better than to believe the fight was over just because the enemy was running. Her body ached from lying in the same position for hours. Her shoulders were numb from the recoil, her lips cracked from the cold wind. But none of that mattered. She was still in control, still holding the high ground, still watching. Below, Lieutenant Brandon Reeve led his team forward. Dust and blood smeared his face, but his eyes were locked in. He looked up toward the ridge, as if he knew Alicia was up there. No radio call, no wave, just a glance, a quiet thank you between warriors. The air support circled wide now, pushing the last of the enemy out of firing range. But there was still danger in the corners of the valley. Still eyes watching from hidden spots, still fingers resting on triggers. Alicia knew this kind of silence. It was the kind that pretended to be peace. Her focus snapped back as she spotted movement near a collapsed cave mouth. 3 fighters, likely snipers, crawling toward new cover. They weren't running like the rest. They were setting up for one last stand. Alicia's breathing slowed again. This was what she was made for, the quiet shots that no one else could take. She adjusted the dial on her scope, shifting her position slightly to get a clean line of sight. One by one, she eliminated them. The cave fell quiet. Another danger erased before it could grow. The rescue team finally reached the pinned soldiers. They moved quickly now, setting perimeter flares, scanning for survivors. More helicopters arrived, lowering stretchers, supplies, and fresh boots on the ground. The mission was transitioning from survival to extraction, but Alicia didn't move. She stayed on the ridge, her rifle still scanning, her breath still calm. Even with backup on the ground, she knew the valley's habits. It had a way of reaching back when you thought you'd escaped. Only when the last injured man was lifted onto a bird did she start packing up. She moved slowly, carefully, covering her trail. She took one last look through the scope, not at the enemy, but at the team below. They were alive because she had come back. As she stood and slung her rifle across her back, her headset buzzed. A voice came through, warm and clear. "Sniper Nest, this is Guardian Base. You are cleared to return. Job well done." Alicia allowed herself the smallest smile. She didn't reply. She just began the hike back along the ridge, the weight of exhaustion finally settling on her shoulders. The sky had turned navy blue now, stars beginning to blink through the haze. The valley was quiet again, not the deadly quiet from earlier, but the kind that comes after survival, after fire and fear and the turning of the tide. She had done her part, and in doing so, she had changed everything. The helicopters came in low, their blades stirring up dust and memory. Searchlights swept across the valley as medics jumped from the side doors, shouting names, scanning for wounds. It looked like a scene from a war movie, smoke rising, soldiers limping, gear scattered across the ground. But for those on the ground, it was no movie. It was the last page of a chapter written in fear, fire, and grit. Alicia Morgan watched it all from her ridge. Her body was stiff, her fingers raw from the cold and steel, but she didn't move yet. She stayed in her nest for a few more minutes, just to be sure. She trusted no silence. Not here, not yet. Below, the rescued team was being loaded onto the birds. Some walked with help, some were carried, some looked back toward the ridge, searching, wondering. One of them, Lieutenant Brandon Reeve, kept scanning the cliffs like he could feel someone watching. And he was right. Alicia finally stood, her joints cracking in protest. She took one long breath, then slowly began the climb down. Each step was careful, controlled. She wasn't just leaving the ridge. She was leaving behind the weight of every decision she'd made in the last few hours. At the base of the slope, a second extraction team was waiting. A crew chief spotted her first, eyes widening as if he'd seen a ghost. "You're the sniper?" he asked. Alicia gave a small nod and kept walking. He didn't say anything else. He just stepped aside and let her board the chopper. Inside, the noise was deafening. Rotors spinning, medics shouting, metal clanging, but Alicia heard none of it. She sat quietly near the back, rifle resting across her lap, hands folded. She didn't speak, didn't need to. The silence around her was louder than any story that could be told. Across from her, Lieutenant Reeve was sitting upright, his arm bandaged, a thin line of blood on his cheek. He looked over, and their eyes met for just a second. No salute, no words, just a slow nod of respect. It was enough. The chopper lifted off, and the valley began to shrink below them. It looked peaceful now, like it had never seen violence. But Alicia knew better. That valley remembered everything, and part of her would always be buried in its shadows. As they flew toward the base, Alicia leaned her head back against the cold wall of the chopper. Her body ached in ways she hadn't felt before. Not just fatigue, but something deeper, heavier. Not pain, not pride. Just weight. When they landed, she stepped out without a word. The medics offered to check her out. She waved them off. "I'm good," she said softly. They believed her because they didn't know how else to respond to someone like her. As she walked across the landing zone, soldiers paused to watch her pass. Some nodded, others stood a little straighter. No one clapped, no one cheered. They all knew this wasn't that kind of moment. She reached the gear tent and set her rifle down on the table. Carefully, gently, like laying a sword to rest. Then she sat on the bench beside it, took off her gloves, and just breathed. The kind of breath that doesn't fill your lungs but empties your soul. A few minutes later, her commanding officer arrived. Colonel Anders stood in silence for a long moment, then said, "They're all alive." Alicia looked up, nodded once, and replied, "That was the point." He handed her a folded slip of paper. "Your flight's been rebooked," he said. "You'll be home in 48 hours." Alicia didn't smile, but her shoulders relaxed a little. For the first time all day, her body let go, just slightly. As the colonel walked away, he paused and looked back. "You were supposed to be home already," he added. Alicia glanced at the rifle on the table and whispered, "So were they." That night, she didn't sleep much. Not because of nightmares, but because the silence felt too loud. After so much chaos, peace felt unfamiliar. Still, she lay in her cot, eyes open, hands steady. And for the first time in weeks, she didn't dream of escape. She had already done the impossible, and she had done it quietly, like a ghost, like a guardian, like the sniper she was. 2 days after she saved a team from vanishing in a forgotten valley, Sergeant Alicia Morgan stepped off the plane into a different kind of silence. No gunfire, no orders, no radio static, just the soft hum of airport heaters and the occasional announcement echoing through the terminal. It wasn't the homecoming she imagined, but it was home. Snowflakes floated gently outside the glass windows. Not dust, not ash, not smoke, just real snow. She stood still for a moment, letting the calm wrap around her like a blanket she'd forgotten how to wear. People moved around her with holiday excitement. Hugs, laughter, coffee cups clinking. But Alicia moved slower, like her body still didn't believe she was safe. Her backpack was light. She had left most of her gear behind, except for the worn patch from her unit and a small box in her jacket pocket. Inside the box was a folded photo, one that had been passed to her by Lieutenant Reeve before she left the base. It showed the rescued team, standing together, bruised and dusty but alive. On the back, scribbled in black marker, were the words, "Thanks to the one we never saw." Alicia didn't need a medal. That note was enough. She walked through the arrivals hall until she saw them. Her mother, standing in a wool coat, arms wide, tears already falling. Her father beside her, holding a camera with trembling hands. And her little sister, Emma, jumping in place like she was 10 years younger. Alicia smiled for the first time in days. A real smile, soft and slow, the kind that came from a place deep inside. She dropped her bag and let her mother wrap her in the kind of hug only a mother can give. Long, tight, silent. "Sorry I'm late," Alicia whispered. Her mom just held her tighter. "You made it, baby," she said, voice cracking. "You made it." They drove home through quiet streets lined with lights and wreaths. Every house glowed like a postcard, windows fogged from warmth inside, children laughing through snowball fights. It all felt distant but beautiful. Alicia watched it through the window, hand resting on the glass like she had to touch it to believe it was real. When they reached the house, Emma ran ahead and flung open the front door. The smell of pine and cinnamon spilled out into the cold air. The tree stood tall in the living room, draped in ornaments and lights that blinked like stars. Underneath it, one present sat alone, a small package wrapped in camouflage paper. "We waited," Emma said, handing it to her. Alicia took it carefully, her hands suddenly unsure. She opened it slowly and found a tiny snow globe inside, a miniature cabin in the woods, with a glowing lantern in the window. She shook it once, and the flakes danced inside, soft and silent. That night, they didn't talk much about what had happened. They didn't ask for details, didn't press for stories. They just sat by the fire, sipping cocoa, listening to old Christmas music. For the first time in months, Alicia wasn't planning her next move. She wasn't calculating angles, measuring danger, or listening for threats. She was just home. And yet, something inside her had changed. The mission, the choice, the faces she had saved, all of it stayed with her. She hadn't just returned from war. She had returned with a story that few would ever understand. But that was okay, because sometimes the loudest victories don't need to be spoken. They just need to be felt. In a mother's hug, a warm drink, a glowing lantern in a snow globe. Later that night, Alicia stood outside on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the snow fall. The world was quiet again. But this time, it wasn't the silence of danger, it was peace. Real, fragile, earned. She looked up at the stars and breathed deeply. The cold filled her lungs, but it didn't sting. She was here, not just alive, but home. And though she'd returned late, though Christmas had already come and gone for most, for her, this was the moment it arrived. Not with bells, not with music, but with quiet and with love.